Every communist revolution that we've seen, the Spanish Revolution, when they tried it in Mexico, when they tried with the French Revolution, which was actually a proto-Marxist revolution.
Yeah, absolutely.
The Russian Revolution, who do they target first? It's the church.
Yeah.
It's always the church, right? In Spanish Revolution, they're raping nuns on the altar, they're murdering priests, burying priests alive, just complete insanity.
So this is the actual Marxist playbook.
And but they kept failing. Obviously, they fail in Spain. Franco comes in, takes over, wipes out the communists. France, Napoleon comes in, restores the church. Russia, obviously, they were successful, but then 80 years later, it falls.
Putin restored the church.
And so there's been a lot of churches that were restored in. Now that's Eastern Orthodox, but there have been a lot of churches restored in Russia, in Belarus. Now in Ukraine, this has become a huge issue right now under Zelensky, because if you're on the wrong, because there was a schism that took place. We're jumping around, but there was a schism that took place a few years before the current war, where the local Orthodox Church broke away from the wider Moscow patriarchate of the church, and so they basically labeled anyone who refused to join the new Ukrainian version. Guess what they named him? A Russian agent.
Yeah.
And so, we might laugh about getting labeled a Russian agent in the United States, but over there, if you're a Russian agent, jail. Yeah. Straight to jail. And that's so if it's you could be a priest, you could be a parishioner, you could be whatever you are. If you're too much involved with that church, and it could be the church that your family's been going to for 100 years.
Here's something that I want to say that people don't know, because this is really censored stuff. But Jewish Marxists, in every revolution, their number one target is religious Jews. And in the Bolshevik Revolution, the Jewish Marxists, that's who they go after. And in Spain and in all those countries where there's a Marxist overthrow, the Marxist Jews actually enjoy destroying religious Jewish communities. That's just how it is.
Well, when you have
we're not supposed to say it because, you're called, it's just all mind control. But the major target of Marxist Jews is religious Jews.
Well, and so, and you'll see religious communities and devout religious communities always be targeted first.
Right.
Because this is your backstop to Marxism, is someone who's devoutly religious.
Right.
Because if you have religion, then you believe in a higher power. You have a belief in God.
Yeah, that isn't the state.
So Marx, the state, the government, the party, this can never become your soul consuming desire.
Well, because
you won't accept the program. You won't accept the program.
Well, because you have a soul that's living and connected to something other. So
you'll never accept the program. So what Dr. Marshall has written out in Infiltration, just to go back to that, when you talk about the church, is the Catholic Church, that it because they kept crashing against the doors of it and never getting anywhere, then they realized, okay, what if instead of attacking it from without, what if we attack it
infiltrate
within? Go to the seminaries, go to the priests, and not all the priests, right? But the ones in positions of power, key positions, and then work your way up the chain to get priests that pervert the doctrine, that twist the teachings to the point where you've essentially made it as if Jesus was a Marxist.
Right. That's called liberation theology.
And that's liberation theology.
And I saw that, I saw that happening in America. Like, pretty soon it was every pulpit was talking about that. And it never was that way before.
No.
I have really studied that.
Well, and it's become a way to take some of the teachings of Jesus, where he talks about charity and talks about feeding the poor, clothe the naked, etc.
Eye of the needle,
and taking the right the camel through the eye of a needle, and taking that and forming almost a new Christianity from these sparse quotes. And then any idea of sin, any discussion of hell, that's all.
Or personal responsibility.
Personal responsibility, accountability, the parable of the talents, to whom much is given, much is asked, right? You have been given talents, therefore you must go out and use those talents for the greater glory of God, but then also for society. So if you're just, if you're not using your talents to become successful and for the glory of God and to give back to your society, then you what are you doing, right? Then you're just Marxist. Then the state has just come in and presupposed all of this, and so they've blended this all together because and Solzhenitsyn talks about this, where it's the essential difference, and this is something that, and here's the thought crime, where what capitalism and communism have in common is that they're both centered on materialism.
Right.
They're both centered on consumption. Whereas, who controls consumption, who controls materialism, etc. Whereas Christianity, where theology is centered, is spiritual.
Right.
It's spiritual.
It's also about transcendence, personal transcendence.
Hopefully.
Yeah. About self-improvement
Right.
and continual self-improvement.
That's right.
And transcendence, which, none of that Marxist crap's about that.
No.
And also, I was telling you, it's so funny because feminism has been so perverted, but originally in the 60s, feminism was the death of Marxism because feminism was a radical analysis of Marxism, calling Marxism chauvinism because it never took into account the unpaid labor of women into factoring in the whole philosophy of Marxism. So it was a sexist and chauvinistic philosophy, which the French feminists proved. They never counted in women's free labor. So I thought that was great at the time, and I was like, great, it's just another scam. It's just another scam, and it's even a worse scam because it is based on stuff that people will never do. And, when they did the Bolshevik Revolution, they always said, well, once people learn the right way, the state will fall away. Right. Well, that's right. Never going to happen. No. People are never going to not be greedy.
Right.
Well, so this, and I don't know if you want that could be a good segue into.
It's whatever you want, man. I'm with you.
So this was studied. This was studied by the guy by the name of John Calhoun, and he and I know, Jake, you have the article there where they were called the Calhoun Mouse Utopia experiments, and back in the 50s and 60s in Maryland, and he created various universes of utopias where the experiment was if you create a society using mice because Marxism is about what equal distribution of resources and equal access to resources. So full resources. Everyone's got full food. Everyone's got full water. Everyone's got access to everything. You will remove the competition for resources. This, by the way, is the reason that in Marxism, the abolition of private property is the essential basis of Marxism.
Right. No private property.
In fact, in Mandarin, the word for communism is called 共产主义. So 共产literally translates to public property. Public property. So the word communism in Chinese, when you say Chinese Communist Party, you're actually it's directly translated as the public property party. So all property will be public owned by the public. So the abolition of what they call the competition for resources is thus defined as a utopia. Calhoun studies this. Now, I don't know if he was necessarily trying to criticize or prove Marxism when he did this, but he was trying to study human nature. And
right.
I'll just put the picture up. You know it better than this article, so you can just...
Yeah, and essentially, it just turned into a complete apocalypse. Complete insanity. Because you had gang warfare that broke out very quickly. The stronger mice, the alpha male mice turned into essentially gang leaders that controlled all the food nodes. Right. The female mice became they were abused, raped, force mated, etc. by these males, and then you had the lesser males. So the lesser, and I'm paraphrasing. There's so much detail in this. We could go into it you could do a whole hour just on this. And he kept trying different iterations. He said, what if I give them apartments to make, because this kept happening. This kept happening inside these utopias that everyone started fighting. And then you had the lesser males. So the lesser males broke into two groups. One, it's sort of like honestly, what you'd call them today are like the incels, right? Involuntary celibates, where they can't mate and they don't have access to the food. And so they would just sort of congregate in the middle, and then eventually they'd become so enraged that they would join together and mass attack the gang leaders, and then eventually tear them apart. But then they would just start killing everyone because they'd be so full of rage. But then you had another form of lesser male, and these were the ones that Calhoun actually dubbed the beautiful ones. And the beautiful ones spent all of their days primping and cleaning themselves.
Metrosexuals.
Becoming, really focused on their appearance. They would only be around each other. They would, attempt to mate with each other sometimes. And, they'd have slight access to food, but they wouldn't even bother with women. They wouldn't, this is where we get the phrase behavioral sink from, because they didn't understand the behaviors required to maintain a society, because they had been raised by mice in these universes, in these utopias, that had never established functional family units. And so they didn't know how to be a functional father, a functional spouse, a functional mate, a functional mother, because they had never had them in the first place. And so you get this huge behavioral sink. It almost a perpetual adolescence kind of sets in, and basically just ends with and this is what's amazing. It ends with a complete breakdown of mating. And so when you have the complete breakdown of mating, you have no more children. And then with no more children, the utopia falls apart. And this happened time after time after time. No matter what he did, he couldn't stop it from happening.